How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Pei Beis, that 82 of Masechta Menachos. Friends, okay, friends. Okay, today's Daf, excuse me, today's Daf is pretty awesome. It talks about, some technical stuff. So using Maaser Sheni for a korbin Todah, right? We learned a Mishnah on yesterday's Daf about using Maaser Sheni for a korbin Todah. And at the end of that Mishnah, it had said, V'lo yavi mechite Maaser Sheni el mimos Maaser Sheni. That you can't bring, that when we say that you could bring a korbin Todah from, right, using Maaser Sheni, you can't actually use the Maaser Sheni itself as the korbin Todah. So, Maaser Sheni is going to be wheat or something. You can't actually use that wheat itself to make the breads. You'd have to actually, right, what did the Mishnah say? It says, Elami ma'us Maaser Sheni. You'd have to be poda the Maaser Sheni onto money and use that money to buy either wheat or bread. We're going to discuss that. That is the first section of today's daf, using Maaser Sheni for a korbin Todah. The next section is designating Maaser Sheni money for a shelamim. Exciting sugya. If you have Maaser Sheni money and you designate that this money is going to be for a korbin shelamim, does that money actually now have the kedusha of a shlam? Does that money now have the kedusha of a shlam, or does it still have the kedusha of Maaser Sheni? Very exciting sugya there. And then we get to a new Mishnah, and essentially for the rest of the daf, we discussed the requirement that Korban Pesach be a chulin animal, which then will apply to other korbanos itself. So very, very exciting daf we have here at Babble on Talmud, Daf Pei Beis of Masechta Menachos. Let's jump in. Friends, we begin on Daf Pei Aleph of Beis of Masechta Menachos. About 7 or so lines from the bottom, there's a 2 dots there that says, Hi v'lachma min hamaiser yavi. That if a person says that he's going to bring the Todah as well as its breads from Maaser Sheni, yavi, do it. Bring the breads and the Todah itself with Maaser as Maaser Sheni. Yavi lo sagi de lo maisi. Wait a second. Isn't chulin going to be better? Isn't chulin going to be preferred over Maaser Sheni? So meaning when he says that I'm going to bring a korbin Todah, that the korbin Todah as well as the breads are going to be Maaser Sheni, yavi, bring it from Maaser Sheni. Does he have to bring Maaser Sheni? What if he wants to bring chulin? Wouldn't that be preferred, to bring a korbin from chulin? Lo sagid lo maisi, what he has to bring Maaser Sheni. Rav Nachman Rav Chizda Amrei Rotza Mevi Rotz Lo Rotza Lo Yavi. Say Rav Nachman Rav Chizda, what it means is that if he wants to, he has the green light, he has the go ahead to bring the korbin using the Maaser Sheni. He has the option. If he says that he's going to bring a korbin Todah and the breads of Maaser Sheni, he has that option. But if he chooses not to use that option, to execute that option, he can, of course, bring the Todah and the breads from chulin, which would be preferred. I do have to say, okay, so if you notice, I'm actually in a different location here because my the normal location is unavailable right now, and I realized I forgot to bring my larger battery up here. So I certainly hope that this won't happen, but it might happen that we get cut off in the middle because the little battery that I have here runs out. So if this stop ends in the middle, I guess we'll just have to pick up from where we left off tomorrow or something. But that's just just in case. I hope that won't happen. Now, the Mishnah had moved on. It said something extremely fascinating. V'lo yavi mechite Maaser Sheni ela mima'os Maaser Sheni. Fascinating. Do not bring the korbin Todah from the wheat of Maaser Sheni, but rather from the money of Maaser Sheni. be podeh the wheat onto money, and use that money for a korban todah. Okay, let's jump into this Gemara. I have a feeling we'll probably take a break to do some explaining soon, but in the meantime, let us jump in. Wait, give me 1 second. I realized I forgot to do something, and now oh no, that's not what I want to do. Now it's done. Okay, great. Now, let me actually make sure. Oh gosh, sorry friends. Okay, turn that off. Okay, I'm trying to. Sheesh, yeah, I'm in a different location. It's like my normal routine of making sure that everything's all set up, I guess, got a little disrupted. Okay, but all good, all good. Rav Nachman and Rav Chisda say, Lo shanu elo mechite Maaser Sheni, aval mechitin alekuches mimaos Maaser Sheni yavi. Okay, that when the Mishnah says Lo yavi mechite Maaser Sheni, okay, again, wait, what? So again, Rav Nachman Rav Chisda Amar Lo shanu elo mechite Maaser Sheni. Okay, you can't use the actual wheat of Maaser Sheni. Aval mechitin alekuchos Maaser Sheni yavi. You can use wheat purchased from Maos Maaser Sheni. Friends, what does that mean? Okay, it means that we don't want you, maybe I'll do some explaining now, we'll see. It means that we don't want you using the Maaser Sheni itself. So, what's Maaser Sheni? Maaser Sheni is, of course, grain. Maaser Sheni is grain. You have, let's say, wheat. Okay, well, it's going to have to be wheat in this case because the Korban Todah, all of the 40 loaves of the Korban Todah are coming from wheat. So you have a wheat field, and you separate Truma, you separate Maaser, and then you separate Maaser Sheni, and you're going to bring that to Yerushalayim. Okay, and now if you're going to offer a Korban Todah, the question is, can you say, well, Korban Todah comes with 40 loaves of bread. I have wheat. Great, I'll grind up the wheat. I'll make flour. I'll make it into bread, and I'll bring a Korban Todah with my own Maaser Sheni wheat as the bread. So we said that that's actually not okay. You can't do that. What you're going to have to do is you're going to have to be podeh the Maaser Sheni, of course, before you get to Yerushalayim, because once you get to Yerushalayim, you can no longer be podeh the Maaser Sheni. So before you get to Yerushalayim, you're going to have to transfer the value of the wheat onto money and use that money to buy. What are you going to buy? So Rav Chisda and Rav Nachman are saying you can use it to buy wheat. You can use it to buy wheat, and you'll grind up that wheat and make it into flour and bread, all that stuff. How come? It sounds weird, right? Why not just use the wheat? Why am I going to transfer it onto money, use that money to buy wheat? Why not just use the wheat? The answer is because a todah is a kind of shlum. I mean, the whole reason why we know bichlal that Maaser Sheni can be used for a korban todah is in the following way. A korban todah is a type of shlum, right? Zebach todah shlom. A todah is a type of shlom. By korban shlomim, we learn out, as we're going to see in a few minutes, we learn out from Gzeira Shavah between shlomim and Maaser Sheni that Maaser Sheni can be used to buy a korban shlom. What's a korban shlom? So korban shlom is an animal, right? It's not shaykh to Maaser Sheni. Maaser Sheni is grain and stuff. An animal. How are you gonna use Maaser Sheni to bring a korban shlomim? Let's say you're gonna bring a sheep as a korban shlomim. How are you gonna use Maaser Sheni to buy a sheep for a korban shlamim? The answer is you're going to transfer the Maaser Sheni, your produce, onto money. Use that money to buy an animal, to buy a sheep, let's say, to be a korban shlamim. So what we're saying is we need to do that same thing for a korban todah. Yes, granted, a korban todah does have these breads, and these breads are wheat, and I have wheat anyways. Can't I just use it? You can't use it because of a technical consideration. That the way that we know a korban todah, that Maaser Sheni b'chal could be used for a korban todah, is because Maaser Sheni could be used for a korban shlamim. How is Maaser Sheni used for a korban shlamim? Well, the Maaser Sheni needs to be transferred to money. The money is then used to buy a korban. So here also, the money is going to have to be used to buy our korban todah, whether we're talking about the animal or even the breads. And according to Rav Chisda and Rav Nachman, that money can be used to buy wheat, and then that wheat can be made into the bread. But again, you're going to have to kind of go through this process of transferring the value onto money and then using the money to buy the wheat according to them. So again, So Rav Nachman, Rav Chizda, Damit Arbayu, Lo Shanu Ela Mechite Maaser Sheni. You can't use the actual wheat of the Maaser Sheni. Avo, however, Mechitin Ala Kuchas Mi Maaser Sheni. But if you transfer the value of the Maaser Sheni on to money, and then that money is used to buy new wheat to be used for the breads, that is fine. Yavi, all good. Yosef, Rabbi Yirmiyah come to Rabbi Yirmiyah is sitting before Rabbi Zera Yosef, and Rabbi Yirmiyah is saying over what Rav Nachman and Rav Chizda are saying, Lo shanu ela mechite Maaser Sheni, that you can't use the actual wheat of the Maaser Sheni for your Korban Todah. Aval mechitin ala kuchis b'maos Maaser Sheni yavi, but wheat purchased with the money of Maaser Sheni, all good. So if you transfer the Maaser Sheni onto money, then that money is used to buy wheat, all good. So Reb Zera says to Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rebbe, Ata Omer Kain, you say thus, Ani Omer, Afilu mechitin halakuchas b'maos Maaser Sheni lo yavi. Says Reb Zera, I, however, disagree. Disagree with you. I say, yes, you have to take the Maaser Sheni, you have to take this wheat of Maaser Sheni, transfer its value onto money. Where I disagree is that while you say that the money could then be used to buy wheat, and then that wheat will be made into bread, I disagree. I say that the money has to be used to buy bread. You can't use the money to buy wheat, you have to use the money to buy bread. The actual breads or the loaves for the Korban Todah. And I will explain your mahalach, Rabbi Yirmiyah, which would also be the mahalach of Rav Chizda and Rav Nachman, and I'll also explain my mahalach. I'll explain to you why, in my opinion, in my view, the money has to be used for the loaves and not for the wheat. The reason for you is, like we had mentioned a few minutes ago, how do we know bichlal that a Korban Todah can be, how do we know bichlal that you can use Maaser Sheni for a Korban Todah? Mishlamim, because Todah is a type of shelamim, and we know that you can use Maaser Sheni for shelamim. Vishlamim, sham mi Maaser. There's a gzera shava of sham. It says by shlamim, v'zavachta shlamim v'achalta sham. And it says by Maaser Sheni, v'nasata kesef b'chol asher tai v'navshecha b'chbaka b'atzun v'yana v'shecha v'chol asher t'shachon v'shecha v'achalta sham. Lefnei Hashem l'okecha v'smachta, etc. It says sham by Maaser Sheni. It says sham by shlamim. Therefore, you can use Maaser Sheni to buy shlamim. Umina, and then now we learn about, right, since we're learning Todah from shlamim, we're going to say, Uma shlamim ein gufon Maaser, just like by definition, as we were mentioning a few minutes ago, by definition, since a korban shlamim is an animal, and Maaser Sheni by definition is crops, so since the animal itself that you're using for the shlamim is not itself Maaser Sheni, rather you're going to take the Maaser Sheni, transfer its value into money, use money to buy that animal. So af Todah nami ein gufa Maaser. So also by a Korban Todah, you can't be using the Maaser Sheni itself as the Korban Todah. You'd have to transfer its value into money, and then you can use money to purchase the Korban Todah. V'hani chite ala kuchos b'maos Maaser Sheni nami ein gufa Maaser. And therefore, Reb Zera explains for Rabbi Yirmiyah, who says that you can use the money to buy wheat, that according to this approach, when using money to buy wheat, that wheat is not the Maaser Sheni itself. It's wheat that has been purchased with money of Maaser Sheni, and therefore it's all good. Just like you can use money to buy an animal and offer that as a Korban Shalom, you can use the money to buy wheat, which will then be made into breads to offer with the Korban Todah. Now, Ema Taimadidi, and I shall now proceed to explain my reasoning. Todah me'echa ka ya ufina. Where do we learn our Todah from? This is going to be similar to before. Yalfin elam shelamim. We learn it out from shlamim. V'shlamim sham sham Maaser, and shlamim is learned out from gzeir sheva from Maaser sheva from Maaser Sheni. V'shlamim ein. Now here's the difference. V'shlamim ein min Maaser. Todah ein min Maaser. Now Reb Zera says where I disagree is that I say that just like when you're using the money of Maaser Sheni, you take Maaser Sheni, transfer it onto money. You use that money to buy an animal to offer as a korban shlamim. That animal is not a min Maaser. It is a type. It's an animal. Animals are not shaykh to Maaser Sheni. You can't, right? Maaser Sheni is grains. Animals, right? You're using the money to buy something that is completely un-Maaser Sheni-able. Therefore, I say the same thing here as well. Even by a korban Todah, when using money of Maaser Sheni to purchase a korban Todah, all elements of the korban Todah that are being purchased have to be elements that are not Maaser Sheni-able. So what does that mean? You're going to have to make breads. Well, don't buy wheat. If you buy wheat is something that you could separate, that Maaser Sheni is shaykh to, right? You grow wheat, you separate Maaser Sheni. Rather buy breads. Breads is already you don't separate Maaser Sheni from bread. You separate Maaser Sheni from wheat. You could then use wheat to make it into bread. That's what you should be buying with the most Maaser Sheni. So Todah ein min Maaser lafuke chitin, to the exclusion of wheat, alakuchos most Maaser Sheni, which would be purchased with the money of Maaser Sheni, to min Maaser ninu, since they are a type that Maaser is separate. Maaser Sheni, Truma is separated from. Rather by bread. That is Reb Zera's opinion. So we saw a machlokes. So everyone agrees that you can't use the Maaser Sheni itself for the korban Todah. There's a machlokes is, can you use the most, once you transfer the Maaser Sheni onto money, can you use money to buy wheat, or no, do you have to use that money to buy bread? Reb Yirmiyah, Reb Chizda, Reb Nachman all say you can buy wheat, it's fine. Reb Zera says no, you have to buy bread. Givaldi. And now we discuss designating Maaser Sheni money for a shelamim. Amar Reb Ami says, Reb Ami, amatpis most Maaser Sheni l'shlamim lo kanu shlamim. Says Reb Ami that if a person has Maaser Sheni and he's poured that onto money, Givaldi, so this money has kedushas Maaser Sheni. Right, it has to be brought to Yerushalayim, spent in Yerushalayim on food. Now, if this money that has kedushas Maaser Sheni, he says, I'm going to use this money to buy a korban shlamim. So the shaila is, does this money now is it considered dmei shlamim? Does it have does it have kedushas shlamim or kedushas Maaser Sheni? Right? Nafkamina, can you now use it to buy peppers, cucumbers, whatever you want to enjoy? Right? Do we say, well, this is Maaser Sheni money, that's kedushas Maaser Sheni, you could buy whatever foods you want? Or do we say, no, once you've said, I'm going to use this money for a korban shlamim, you've committed to using it for a korban shlamim? Friends, what do you say? Says Rabami, most Maaser Sheni l'shlamim lo kanu shlamim. Says Rabami, a person says, I am going to use this Maaser Sheni money for a korban shlamim, does not become shlamim, it remains Maaser Sheni money. My time, how come? Dilo alimo kedushas hashlamim lemechol kedushas Maaser Sheni. We've seen before in the past there's a machlokes between Reb Yehuda and Reb Meir. We're going to mention this machlokes in a little bit. That according to Reb Yehuda, Maaser is mammon hedged. The Maaser Sheni money belongs to the person who owns it. Okay. Reb Meir, however, holds, we'll discuss it a little bit later. Reb Meir, however, holds that the Maaser Sheni money is mammon gavoya. It's holy money. It's the Rabbeinu Shalom's money. And therefore, what Reb Ami is saying is, my time alkom to lo alima kedushas hashlamim, when you say, I'm going to use this money for a korban shlamim that isn't any stronger Right? Lo alima kedushas ashlamim. The shlamim kedusha is not stronger or strong enough lemeichal kedushas Maaser Sheni to bichal on top of the holiness of the Maaser Sheni. After all, the Maaser Sheni is mammon gavoa. It's the Rabbeinu Shalom's money, and you aren't the kedusha of shlamim isn't going to override that. So it remains Maaser Sheni money, not shlamim money. Meisvei, we have a kasha from a Mishnah in Masechta Maaser Sheni, very interesting Mishnah that says Aloikeach chaya lezivchei shlamim. If a person uses Maaser Sheni money to purchase a chaya for a korban shlamim, korbanis are offered from behemoths, goats, sheep, cows. Chayas, like a deer, for example. I don't think I'm going to keep on saying deer. I think I'm just going to say chaya, but an example of a deer, of a chaya, would be a deer. There are no korbanos offered from chayas. So now, if a person uses most Maaser Sheni to buy a chaya, which would be okay, buy a deer to eat lunch, that's okay. But to buy a chaya as a shlamim, it doesn't add up, because shlamim are behemoths, sheep, goat, cows. They're not chayas. So if a person uses most Maaser Sheni to buy a chaya to be a shlamim, and this next example is very interesting as well. Uvehema lebasar taiva, very, very interesting. Or if he uses the most Maaser Sheni, the money of Maaser Sheni, to buy a sheep, but L'taiva, what does that mean? For lunch. What does that mean? What new? Okay, so mido raisa, that's okay, right? What does the pasuk say? I'll read you a pasuk. Use it for cows, sheep. That's fine. So make or din, you're not doing anything wrong, right? However, we do, a little chaval that you come from your farm, wherever you live in Eretz Yisrael, you come with you had your farm and your field, and you had all your Maaser Sheni, and it was, Baruch Hashem, it was a lot of Maaser Sheni, too much to schlep. You transferred its value onto money. Now you come to Yerushalayim to bring with all your money. Your mamish next to the Beis Hamikdash. You can mamish smell the ketoris. And you have money. You say, you know what? I'm going to buy a sheep. And you buy a sheep and you go home and you put it in the oven. Chava, we want to encourage you to be, instead of buying that sheep and going home and putting it in the oven, buy that sheep, take it to the Beis Hamikdash, and offer it as a korban shlamim. The emurim will go on the mizbeach. You're probably not going to eat the emurim anyways. Well, it's chaylev and stuff like that anyways. Yeah, the chazav v'shok will go to the kohen, and you'll get the rest. You'll take that home. You bring a korban shlamim. So I saw in the Kahati yesterday, I was learning with the Kahati Mishnayos, and he quoted a Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says that mitchila, initially, they didn't give you a hard time. Initially, look, if you wanted to buy a sheep and go home and cook it in your oven, in your Airbnb or whatever, they didn't give you a hard time. But once it was becoming an issue that people were mamish coming to Yerushalayim with most Maaser Sheni, and they just weren't bringing korbanis. So they had to take a stand, and they said that that is not okay, and you have to use the money if you're going to be buying sheep, if you're going to be buying cows, you have to be bringing it as a korban shlamim. So the Mishnah says, if a person uses most Maaser Sheni to purchase a chaya for a korban shlamim, which is not shaykh, uvehema lebasar taiva, or a sheep, but not as a korban shlamim, just to put in your oven in your Airbnb. Lo yetza or lo yatsa or lechulin, the hide will not be chulin. The hide of the animal won't be chulin. It won't be chulin. So we want to assume, what does that mean? So lav the mema de kani shlamim. Does that not mean that it's a shlamim? What does that mean? So let's focus on the chaya lezivchei shlamim. So we're saying if a person uses most Maaser Sheni to buy a chaya as a shlam, which we said doesn't add up. So we're saying that the hide does not become chulin. What does that mean? Well, if you were to use money if you were to use Maaser Sheni money to buy a korban shelamim, which is encouraged, so you use the Maaser Sheni money, you're going to buy a korban shelamim. Okay, now that it's a korban shelamim, so the meat is going to be a korban shelamim. It's going to have all the kedusha of korban shelamim, and so that would be a korban shelamim. Now, the hide, right? So the korban shelamim needs to be eaten, right? So the basar is going to be a shelamim. You're going to eat the meat and the emurim and the chazav ashok and the everything. The meat is going to be a shlam. What happens to the hide? Nobody's eating the hide. What happens to the hide? It becomes chulin. Do whatever you want with it. The hide becomes chulin. So when you use most Maaser Sheni to buy a sheep to be a korban shlamim, so the meat is a shlamim and the hide is chulin. But what we want to say is going on in this Mishnah is that if you use most Maaser Sheni to buy a chaya as a shlamim, which doesn't add up because chayas aren't shlamim, so lo yotza ha'or l'chulin. So in that case, the hide does not become chulin. What does it become? So we want to say what it becomes is dmei shlamim. What it means is that when a person uses Maaser Sheni money to buy a chaya as a shlamim, he knows that you can't offer a chaya as a shlamim. Shlamim are sheep, goats, cows, not deer. You can't offer a chaya as a shlamim. So when he buys this chaya as a shlamim, what's he doing? He's essentially saying that this chaya is demei shlamim. It has the value of shlamim. He obviously can't offer it as a shlamim. He's then going to have to use this chaya to now buy a shlamim. And we're saying that it's entirely dmei shlamim, not just the meat, but the hide as well. Also, the value of the hide is going to be dmei shlamim. So what do we see? So we see that the most Maaser Sheni essentially have now become shlamim. Use this most Maaser Sheni to buy this deer, and we're saying that not just the meat, but even the hide, lo yatsa l'chulin, i.e., it's all demei shlamim. So the most Maaser Sheni has now become shlamim. So says the Gemara, ha'it marla, it was stated about this, Amar Rav, says Rav, lo kani shlamim. Says Rav, no, that is not the correct way to understand this. Rather, it's the opposite. The opposite. It's actually that nothing at all happened. It's that nothing at all happened. When you use most Maaser Sheni to buy a deer, it is not a shlamim. It is not demei shlamim. It remains ma'os Maaser Sheni. That's what it means. It means that if you were to buy a sheep, so the meat would be a shlamim. Right? If you buy a sheep as a shlamim, the meat would be a shlamim, the hide would be chulin. But if you buy a deer, all of it remains Maaser Sheni. That's what it means. And the hide doesn't become chulin. It remains Maaser Sheni, just like Maaser Sheni value, money, just like the rest of the animal, just like the meat. Umay lo yotza or lechulin. What does it mean that the hide does not become chulin? This is what it's saying. Einu b'toras lotzes or lechulin. It's not even in the parsha. It's not even in the Torah. It's not bichlal shayich to the concept of becoming chulin. What does that mean? What's the concept of becoming chulin? Well, if it was a shlamim, right? If the money of the Maaser Sheni was used to buy a sheep, and the sheep to buy a sheep as a shlamim. So as a shlamim, the meat is shlamim, and the hide becomes chulin. But here, this is completely not shaykh. You bought a deer. A deer isn't shaykh to korban shlamim. It's not even in that parsha. It's not b'toras, let's say so, or the chulin. It all just remains Maaser Sheni. Nothing changes. My time of Rabba naisek kilokeach sholach risha, says Rabba, it's like you bought a plow cow. It's like you used Maaser Sheni money to buy a plow cow, to buy a cow to work your field. Bichlal not shaykh. You have to use Maaser Sheni money to buy food in Yerushalayim to enjoy. You use Maaser Sheni money to buy a plow cow? You need to use it to buy a chow cow. And therefore, if you use the Ma'os Maaser Sheni to buy a plow cow, nothing happens. It remains Ma'os Maaser Sheni. That's what's going on here. So we are saying that it does not, the money does not become shlamim, rather it remains Maaser Sheni money. Itmar was stated, ha matbis Ma'os Maaser Sheni l'shlamim, that if somebody designates Ma'os Maaser Sheni to be shlamim, Rabbi Yochanan Amar Kani, Rabbi Yochanan says that taka does become shlamim money. You can't use it to buy vegetables. Rabbi Elazar Amar Omer Lo Kani. Rabbi Elazar says, like we were saying earlier, that it does not become shlamim money. It remains Maaser Sheni money. Now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the Omar Maaser Mammon Hedgetu. Now, as we mentioned earlier, according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the Maaser Sheni money is Mammon Hedget, it belongs to the person. So if it belongs to the person, he could designate it as shlamim money. Sure. Of course, everyone agrees. If he says, I'm making my Maaser Sheni money, which belongs to me, into shlamim money, designating it for korban shlamim, okay, you could do that. Where they argue is Alibud Reb Meir is according to Reb Meir. The Amar who says Maaser Mammon Gavohu, that Reb Meir says that Maaser Sheni money belongs to the Rabbeinu Shalom. Belongs to the Rabbeinu Shalom. Mandamar Lo Kani. So according to Reb Elazar, who says that it does not become shlamim money, Ki Reb Meir, he holds like Reb Meir that, well, because Maaser Sheni money is Hashem's money, you can't. So it remains that it doesn't become shlamim money. It doesn't change to be shlamim money. Uman de Omer Kani. Now, according to Reb Yochanan, who says that it does become shlamim money, Kevan de Maaser Karev le shlamim, since Maaser Sheni money can be used to purchase a korban shlamim, as we talked about earlier, and can be offered as a korban shlamim. So ki mit pasas le nami tafis. When you say, I am designating this money as a korban shlamim, it becomes a korban shlamim. Since you can use it to buy a korban shlamim, designating it in advance becomes shlamim money. Maybe we have a contradiction on matbis Ma'os Maaser Sheni l'shlamim, that a person who says that this Maaser Sheni money is going to be shlamim money, kishu podan mosef aleim shnei chomshin, when he is poda this money, he needs to add a double chomesh. He needs to add a double chomesh. Echad hektish ve'echad l'maiser. Basically, if he's going to be poda, I'm not sure, is he being poda the money? Can you do that? Can you be poda the money? Maybe. Or maybe if you buy maybe it means if you buy a korbin with it, and then it maybe gets a mum, you have to be poda it. Okay, I just had a quick look around, quick spelunk, and actually I saw in a note in the article that he quotes the Rashi on top. You see, I've been reading the Rashi on the bottom. I've been reading the manuscript Rashi. I've been actually finding that to be a little bit smoother, but I guess I missed this Rashi. But anyways, it could even be talking about that he just transferred onto different monies. Maybe these were, I don't know, hundreds, and he wanted to transfer. Maybe he came to Yerushalayim with hundreds, but now he needed smaller denominations. Maybe he needed 50s and 20s and stuff. So he was breaking out to other money. Okay, so he's got to add a fifth. So we say not only does he add 1/5, he taka adds 2/5. Echad hektish ve'echad l'maiser. One for the hektish, for the shlamim, for the fact that he made it a shlamim, and the other for that it's maaser. So we see that the shlamim designation sticks. Misavrat divrei akol hi hamani Rabbi Yehuda. Yeah, but who says that this is? Everybody agrees with it. This could dafka be the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the Maaser Sheni is Mammon Hedget, but that Reb Meir would disagree. That is what Rabbi Elazar would say. He would say that Reb Meir disagrees, and that the Maaser Sheni money does not have the shlamim designation. Now we get up to the next Mishnah and the final section of today's daf. I hope that we should have enough. What does that do? I don't know what that means. I hope that we should have enough battery to get to the end of the daf. I have around 46%, which I think should be enough. Anyways, this section, what we're going to discuss now is how we know that all korbanos in general need to come from chulin. That is going to be learned from Korban Pesach. We will then proceed to spend the rest of the daf discussing how we know, and we're going to continue on this discussion tomorrow, how we know that a Korban Pesach needs to be offered from chulin. Says the Mishnah, Minay la'omer, Harei olai Todah. If a person says, I am committing to bring a Korban Todah. Okay? He has a chiyuv now to bring a Korban Todah. Shelo yavi ela min chulin. Well, once he now has a chiyuv to bring a Korban Todah, he's committed to bring a Korban Todah. Now when he's going to go and find an animal to bring, he must bring a chulin animal. There's no option to use Maaser Sheni or anything like that. Talmud lomar, therefore it says, V'zavachta Pesach Hashem lekecha tzon uvoker. Givaldig. It's Pesach right now. V'zavachta Pesach Hashem lekecha, you will slaughter and offer or sacrifice a Korban Pesach Hashem lekecha tzon uvoker. Flock, sheep, goat, and even cows. What? Korban Pesach is sheep, goats, not cows. So why are we talking about cows? In order to learn about all korbanos that are offered from sheep and from cows, like a shelamim or an ola, it said, for example, they are all compared to the korbin Pesach, ma Pesach davar shebechova, ve'eno ba elam min chulin. Just like one is obligated to bring a korban Pesach. Of course, if one does not bring a korban Pesach, it's chayiv karis. Hopefully, we'll be able to bring korban Pesach very soon. If Mashiach comes now, do we bring a Pesach Sheni? I don't know. Akoponim. So I assume not. I don't know. I assume not, but maybe. Akoponim. So just like Pesach is an obligation and it must be brought from chulin. All obligations must come from chulin. Therefore, therefore, a person says, I am committing to bringing a korban Todah. I am committing to bringing a korban shelamim. Since he's now obligated, he obligated himself to bring it. Lo yavio ella min chulin. It's got to come from chulin. Now, when we had said in the previous Mishnah that if a person says, I'm going to bring a korban Todah from Maaser Sheni, so he brings it from Maaser Sheni, that is because he's milichatchila is saying, I'm going to bring a Todah from Maaser Sheni. So from milichatchila, he linked those things together. But if he first says, I am going to bring a korban Todah, and now that he says that, he's obligated to bring a korban Todah, that obligation must be satisfied with chulin. V'nisachim bechol makom lo yaviu ela min chulin. And nisachim can never, or must always come from chulin. Can never come from Maaser Sheni or anything like that. They must always come from chulin. How come? Because Maaser Sheni, as we discussed earlier, you bring to Yerushalayim, with the money of Maaser Sheni, you bring to Yerushalayim, and you enjoy yourself. You buy vegetables, maybe a little trina, and you have a great time. You enjoy yourself. Now, nisachim, right? And therefore you could also bring a korban shelamim, because you eat the korban shelamim. Most of it goes to you. You take it home. Todah as well. Nisachim, however, it all goes on the mizbeach. Right? The nisachim, minchas nisachim, right? The flour and the oil, the wine, it's all going on the mizbeach. Therefore, the nisachim must always come from chulin. You can't use Maaser Sheni for that. Says the Gemara, Ufesach gufa minolin. We're learning out all of these korbanos from the Korban Pesach. Just like the Korban Pesach is an obligation and it comes from chulin, all of your korbanos have to come from chulin. How do you know Korban Pesach comes from chulin? Desani, we're learning about Rabbi Eliezer. Says Rabbi Eliezer, Nemer Pesach, Nemer Pesach Ledoris. Says Pesach in Achodesh Hazeh Lachem, the 12th parak of the book of Exodus. And it says Pesach Ledoris, for example, in Parshas Emor. Ma Pesach Omer b'Mitzrayim loy ba'ela min chulin. Just like in Egypt, the Korban Pesach by necessity was chulin. There was no Maaser Sheni in Egypt. There were no fields that they were separating trumas and maasros from. The animal that they offered in Egypt was chulin. memele. Pesach amar l'doris lo ba'ela min chulin, and therefore, just like Pesach in Mitzrayim was memele chulin, also Pesach for all generations must be chulin. Amar Rabbi Akiva says to his Rebbe Eliezer, v'chidanin efshar mishai efshar. One second. I take issue with that mahalach because in Egypt they offered the Korban Pesach from chulin out of necessity. All they had was chulin. There was no Maaser Sheni. In the future, when there is the possibility of using most Maaser Sheni for Korban Pesach, I wouldn't just know because Rabbi Akiva doesn't necessarily disagree with the premise. Rabbi Akiva agrees that Korban Pesach has to come from chulin. As far as I understand, I think tomorrow we're going to get more into this. He agrees that Korban Pesach has to come from chulin. He disagrees with Rabbi Eliezer's premise because Rabbi Eliezer is learning out from Pesach Mitzrayim. Pesach Mitzrayim was chulin out of necessity. That wouldn't teach us that Pesach Doris, when there's a possibility of Maaser Sheni, maybe then you can use Maaser Sheni. Maybe even in Pesach Mitzrayim, if there was Maaser Sheni, you could have been able to use it. It's just, the fact of the matter was, it wasn't an option. Amalei, to which Rabbi Eliezer responds, Afal Pisha Yefshir, says Rabbi Eliezer, even though you're right, that there was no other possibility in Egypt, there was only the possibility of chulin. Nonetheless, Vayegedola he v'nomad heimena. Nonetheless, says Rabbi Eliezer, I stick by my raya, and we're going to learn it out from Pesach Mitzrayim. Rabbi Akiva now gave another challenge, and he says, Pesach Mitzrayim, there was no Mishkan, there was no Beis Hamikdash, there was no Mizbeach. You took the sheep and you slaughtered it in your house. You took the blood and you put it on your doorpost. Very different. There's no Mizbeach that anything was being offered on. Tomer Pesach Doris, you can't learn out from there to future Korban Pesachs. Shetom Ma'in Domim where the blood is being thrown on the Mizbeach and the Emurin are being burnt in the Mizbeach. Totally different thing. No comparison. Omer Loi, to which Rabbi Eliezer responds, Harei Omer, you know what the Pasuk says? This is Pasuk, I think this is in Parsha of Kadesh. It says, Ve'avates avoda azos b'chodesh hazeh. That it says, what does it say? I'm going to read the pasuk. V'kiviyacha Hashem el eretz haknani v'achita hamoyim v'achiva abusi v'ashenish b'ala v'sechel aseslach eretz zovas chal v'dvash v'avates avoda azos b'chodesh hazeh. You'll do this avoda of the Korban Pesach in this month. Sheyu kol avodos chodesh hazeh kazeh. That all of the avodas of this month should be like this, like it was in the first year of Yitzias Mitzrayim. So for all generations, the Korban Pesach will be like the Pesach Mitzrayim, i.e. chulin. Rabbi Akiva, now we're going to drill a little bit deeper into Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Eliezer's shitas. Rabbi Akiva, isavar lo de'ein danin efshir mishi efshir leiku b'milsei. So Rabbi Akiva, if Rabbi Akiva sticks with his position that ein danin efshir mishi efshir, we can't learn out something that's possible from something that's impossible. In Egypt, it was impossible to bring anything other than chulin. All they had was chulin. That can't teach us anything about future generations where there's a possibility of Maaser Sheni. So if Rabbi Akiva holds with that perspective, well then, why, right, Leiku b'milsei, let him stand with it. Why then start talking about Zrika Saddam and Aktaras Emurin? They didn't have that. There was no Mizbeach in Egypt. Why? Ain't done an efshir mishi efshir, stick with that. And if he changed his mind, he says, you know what? Done an efshir mishi efshir. Yeah, Einachinami in Egypt, all they had was chulin, but so what? They didn't use Maaser Sheni memele, so in the future generations you can't use Maaser Sheni. But so if he changed his mind, v'hai de lo gomer Pesach Mitzrayim mishum hai pircha. But there was a different issue. The issue was now that in Egypt there was no Mizbeach, and in the future there's Mizbeach, therefore you can't learn from it. But Pesach midba yochiach. The thing is that is a problematic proof. It doesn't actually stand the test of scrutiny. Because here's the thing. if you say that the issue with learning out from Pesach Mitzrayim, meaning we have no problem with the fact that it's chulin. Yeah, there's no possibility of Maaser Sheni. That doesn't matter. In Egypt, it was chulin. The problem is that in Egypt there was no mizbeach. In the future there's a mizbeach, so therefore it's apples and oranges. But here's the thing: they offered the Korban Pesach in the wilderness. I believe they only offered one Korban Pesach in the wilderness, if I'm not mistaken. But they offered at least that one Korban Pesach in the wilderness. When the tabernacle was already inaugurated. Which means that there was an example of a Korban Pesach when there was a Mizbeach, and in the wilderness there was no Maaser Sheni. It was chulin, and there was no Maaser Sheni because they weren't in Eretz Yisrael. There was no possibility of Maaser Sheni there. So they brought. So meaning, if you're going to say that we can't learn out from Pesach Mitzrayim about chulin because there was no Mizbeach, okay, well the next year in the wilderness there was a Mizbeach and they still brought it from chulin. So therefore, Rabbi Akiva, you're challenged from the fact that there's no Mizbeach in Mitzrayim. Sure, there's no Mizbeach in Mitzrayim, but what about the next year when they offered chulin out of necessity and there was a Mizbeach? So we should be able to, if the whole issue is that there was no Mizbeach in Mitzrayim, well there was a Mizbeach in the wilderness and still it was chulin. Now, the Dvar of Rabbi Eliezer Ka'amar, well, Rabbi Akiva was simply responding to Rabbi Eliezer, look, Lididi, Ein done an Evshir Mishi Evshir. Look, I hold, like I said earlier, we can't learn out something that is possible from something that's impossible. However, Lididach the Amar done an Evshir Mishi Evshir. However, I do understand that you hold that it is possible to learn out from Egypt where all there was chulin, that you see, it has to always only be chulin. You have no problem with that. But Pesach Mitzrayim she'eno ton ma'in damim ve'emurin ligabi mizbeach ton Pesach Doris she'ton ma'in damim ve'emurin ligabi mizbeach. However, says Rabbi Akiva, I still have a second question, which is the whole mizbeach thing. From Rabbi Eliezer v'avadta, Rabbi Eliezer says, well, okay, I have another pasuk v'avadta es ha'avoda azos b'chodesh hazeh, comparing this month for all generations. Is it this month of this year? Rabbi Eliezer le'melei Pesach midbar yochiach. Why did Rabbi Eliezer just respond to Rabbi Akiva with the fact that, okay, well then let's learn it out from the Korban Pesach in the wilderness where it was offered from chulin, right? Why? Meaning there was a hole in Rabbi Eliezer's argument with the whole Mizbeach thing, because the next year there was a Mizbeach. Why didn't Rabbi Eliezer simply respond with that? The Dvar of Rabbi Akiva Ka'amar, he was responding to Rabbi Akiva, look, according to me, I say done in Evshir Mishi Evshir, we can learn out Pesach of all generations from Pesach in Egypt. Ve'imishum hai pircha, and if you're going to say, Rabbi Akiva, that, well, there was no Mizbeach in Mitzrayim, Pesach Midbar Yochech. Okay, well, yeah, Pesach Midbar, there was a Mizbeach and it was chulin. But Ledidach, the Amrite, ain't done in Evshir Mishi Evshir. But, however, just to respond to you, Rabbi Akiva, that you say ain't done in Evshir Mishi Evshir, okay, well, I'll learn it out from somewhere else. That the pasuk says, that we compare all generations to the Pesach of this generation, of this month of Mitzrayim. Okay, but why is that a better answer? You could still ask the same question, meaning Rabbi Eliezer is saying, I say done in Efshir Mishi Efshir, but you, Rabbi Akiva, say ain't done in Efshir Mishi Efshir. So let's learn it out from this other pasuk where we're going to compare all Pesach of all generations to the Pesach of Mitzrayim. Well, you can ask the same question. Ain't done in Efshir Mishi Efshir. So Rav Sheshes also meres in B'shivin al Hekish. Says of Sheshes, well, it's a little bit more than that. It's not a mematzinu. We're not simply saying that, well, in Egypt, the Korban Pesach was offered from chulin, therefore for all generations offered from chulin. Ain't done in Efshir Mishi Efshir. Yeah, you can ask that question. Here it's a little bit different. It's not enough from a Hekish. The pasuk says, Vavatis avoda azos b'chodesh hazeh. I think the point maybe is that it's comparing Zos to Zeh. Kilu, that somehow the limud shayu kol avoda shechol zeh kazeh. That is basically it's learned out from the limud, the juxtaposition in the these words in the psukim. So enough from words in the psukim that for all generations. Oh, great! Somebody's playing music really loud. Wow, very loud. It's very strange. There's this. It's very weird. All right, hurry up. It's very strange. I'm right now, there's a window behind me. How much battery do I have left? Okay, I should have enough battery to have this little detour. There's a window right behind me. Literally right behind me is the street, right? That's what I was talking about. If I open up, this is the window that I open up to hear Parsha Zachor if I need to. There's a shul right across the street. Sometimes there was just like Jewish music playing really loud coming from the street. And I wonder sometimes what it is. Anyways, I saw the other day, it's this little Haredi kid. There's a lot of there's these like little Haredi neighborhoods that like right next to us. This shul is like kind of a Haredi shul. Anyways, there's this like Haredi kid. I know him. I know who he is. Like I know his face. He's like one of the local kids. He just walks around. He just walks down the street with like a loudspeaker, just blasting music, like Haredi music. It's kind of weird. Like he just walks down the street holding a loudspeaker, just playing like Haredi music, like inappropriately loud. I don't know why he does it. That just happened. Anyways, so where are we? So anyway, so sorry. Right. So the point is that it's not just a mematzinu. It's actually, we're learning it out from psukim. It's a hekesh. We're learning it out from the juxtaposition of, I think the point is zot and zeh, learning it out from that pasuk, and therefore ein meshivin al hekesh. This isn't just another mematzinu. It's actually a limud from a pasuk. It's a hekesh. You can't, and if it's a hekesh, then that, okay, it's a hekesh. We're not going to ask a question on it. Over tarbitza amur, in the Beis HaMedrash, they asked, Tosfos says, why is it called tarbitza? Because it's the Beis HaMedrash where they're marbitz Torah. Our friend Reb Neil, how's Pesach going, Reb Neil? Someone that's learned out from Hekesh can now teach with the Hekesh. How do we know that all of these other korbanis need to come from chulin? Well, because we know that, Pesach Doris was learned out from Pesach Mitzrayim. So now that we know about Pesach Doris from Pesach Mitzrayim via Hekesh, we're now going to compare it to all of the other, right? Because now it says by Korban Pesach, it says Tzonu Bakar, so we compare Bakar and Tzon to Korban Pesach. So Korban Pesach Doris, which itself is learned from Hekesh from Pesach Mitzrayim, is now teaching about all these other korbanos. B'chidavar lamed beHekesh, Choser u'melamed beHekesh, b'chlala itmar de Pesach kule chad milsei. No. The fact that Pesach Doris is coming from chulin is not learned out from a hekesh. It's all one concept of Korban Pesach, right? Meaning, what was an example of Dar v'lo behekesh chozum lam behekesh? If I remember correctly, maybe Reb Neil, you could align us properly if necessary. But I think that where we learned about it in the Sugya Masechta Zvachim, I think we had a halacha by Parlam Davar Shel Tzibor that was learned out by a hekesh from Parkoy Mashiach, which was then teaching us, I think, about Seiri Avodah Zarah. So we had Parlam Davar Shel Tzibor, which was learned out from Parkoy Mashiach, which is now teaching this thing that we learned out from Parlam Davar Shel Tzibor, is now teaching something about Seiri Avodah Zarah. That doesn't work. These are three separate sugyas. You can't have this thing being learned from that one, now teaching about that one. When it comes to Korban Pesach, it's all the same Korban Pesach. It's just the halacha by Korban Pesach is that it needs to be from chulin, because we compare the initial Korban Pesach to all Korban Pesachs, but it's all just Korban Pesach, and it's not Korban Pesach is now teaching a hekesh to all these other korbanis. But it's not considered like the Pesach Doris is learned by a hekesh from Pesach Mitzrayim. No, this is all the same concept of this is how we know that Korban Pesach in general needs to be from chulin, and now Korban Pesach is now teaching us about other korbanos that they also need to come from chulin. Friends, we are going to stop here because now you see the Gemara says Rebbe Akiva Pesach deinu ba'el min chulin minole. How do we know that Rebbe Akiva holds that Korban Pesach for our generations needs to come from chulin? This is going to open up a whole new sugya that we will learn on tomorrow's daf. So friends, that was daf Pei Beis of Masechta Menachos. On daf Pei Beis of Masechta Menachos, we learned about using Maaser Sheni for a Korban Todah. That was an interesting sugya. We had learned that Maaser Sheni must first be transferred to money. If you want to use Maaser Sheni for a Korban Todah, it must first be transferred to money. It cannot directly use Maaser Sheni wheat, right? Because it's learned out from Korban shelamim, where money was used to buy Korban shelamim, so money has to be used to buy the Korban Todah. And Rav Nachman, Rav Chizda, Rav Yirmiyah say you can use Maaser Sheni money to buy wheat for the breads, right? As long as you're using money of Maaser Sheni to buy the wheat, that's fine. You can't use the Maaser Sheni wheat itself, but if you transfer its value to money, and then that money is used to buy wheat, just like money would be used to buy a Korban Shlamim, that's acceptable. Or as Reb Zera says, no, that's not enough. Since wheat is still wheat, you have to actually buy bread. You just like the animal of a Korban Shlamim is not wheat, is not something that's Maaser Sheni. So also what you buy has to be something that's not Maaser Sheni, i.e. bread. So Reb Zera says Maaser Sheni money can be used to buy the breads themselves, but not wheat. We then discuss designating Maaser Sheni money to be used for a shelamim. Rabbi Yochanan says, yes, it becomes a shelamim, whereas Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Ami say it does not become kedushas shelamim. And we said that this aligns now to the machlokes between Reb Yehuda and Reb Meir about is Maaser Sheni mamun hedget or mamun gavoya. Reb Yehuda says Maaser Sheni money belongs to the person. It's mamun hedget, and therefore, everyone would agree, according to Rabbi Yehuda's shita, that you'd be able to make that into shlamim money, because it's his money, he can make it into whatever he wants. He can designate it for a shlamim. However, according to Rabbi Meir, who says that it's mamun gavoya, so Rabbi Yochanan, who says you can make it shlamim, he says that it's because... Why did he say that? Why did he say that you can make it into a shlamim? I actually have to look that up. Okay, fine. Since you could use the Maaser Sheni money to make a Korban Shlamim, so therefore you could designate it as Shlamim. Whereas Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Ami say you can't designate it as Shlamim since it is Mammon Gavoa already. You can't make it into Shlamim money. And finally, the requirement that Korban Pesach may be a chulin animal, says Rabbi Elazar that we learn it must be a chulin. The requirement that Korban Pesach be a chulin animal. But Eliezer says that we learn it out from Pesach Mitzrayim. We then had a whole discussion between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva about can you learn out Efsher Mishi Efsher and all of those questions. And tomorrow we're going to see the shita of Rabbi Akiva, how he knows that Korban Pesach must be from chulin. Friends, have a great day. It looks like, thank God, there was enough battery, which is great. I will catch you tomorrow. Cheers.